Chris, welcome to the Without Limits podcast.
Thanks, Ollie.
You're someone that I've been following on social media now since probably the turn of the year, I think. And we've had some good interactions with you through socials. I think it's just fascinating the way you're bringing psychology to life. And I think some of the principles and things and frameworks that you've posted on social media have really resonated with myself, the team here. We're a company that really tries to drive a high performance culture. And my experiences within rugby as well, I often refer to as having a big impact on the success that I've had today and the way in which I think. So I think having access to someone like you and talking through some of those things today will be really beneficial for the listeners. So first and foremost, thank you very much for giving up your time and coming on. I always start by asking people what Without Limits means to them. I've had some great responses, and I think a response from a sports psychologist will be fantastic to hear. So what does Without Limits mean to you? Or what do you think about when you hear the term Without Limits?
Pressure. So I'll take you back to, there was an experiment conducted around 150 years ago from a zoologist, a guy called, I forgot his name already.
Call him Mr. X.
By a zoologist, Carl Mobius, Dr. Carl Mobius.
There we go.
What he did, he took a pike, like a large predatory fish, took this pike and put it in this big glass tank, let it swim around this tank. And then at certain intervals, he introduced smaller fish into the tank, right? And as you can imagine, the pike, being the predator that it is, straight for the fish, hoovered them all up, happy days, right? And this kind of continued. And then partway through this experiment, they inserted a glass panel in the middle of the tank. So now the pike was one side, and then when they introduced the fish into the tank, they put the fish into the other side. So the first time that they introduced the fish, once this glass panel was in, again, you can imagine the pike just charging for them, but this time, straight into this glass panel. Bit of a sore nose. Came back, again, multiple attempts to try and get these fish, and obviously couldn't. And what they observed over the course of the next few days is when they introduced the fish, the pike's desire to try and get these fish waned to the point where it ended up just pretty much existing on the bottom of the tank on its side. But then the interesting part of that experiment was then they removed the glass divide. So now all the fish are swimming together again. And at no point did the pike try and attack the fish. In fact, it only ate the food that the researchers then gave it, as opposed to taking these fish, right? Subsequent experiments took it even further. Probably not that ethical, but to the point where the pike actually died from starvation. So imagine, it's become so limited in its belief that it can't get the fish. It dies from starvation when there's this abundance of food source all around it, swimming in and amongst it, right? And so the reason I wanted to share that was, I think in many ways, a lot of us are like that pike. We let our limiting beliefs or our fear of failure or perceived shortcomings block us from making effort. And so Without Limits to me is the ability to seek opportunity, to see opportunity, and then to be able to align our behaviors to enable to expedite that opportunity, as opposed to using behaviors that may be based on assumptions that aren't true anymore, or that don't serve us any longer. Make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense.
So I guess in short, yeah, Without Limits to me is don't be a victim of the pike syndrome.
That's great. I mean, so the key there is the awareness to see the abundance that's around you. How does someone overcome, I mean, we're jumping forward here, but how does someone overcome the inability to see that, or the shackles of previous experiences and years gone by, or experiences they may have had, to be able to see the abundance in the opportunities that might sit in front of them?
Again, I think it's the fundamental start point to all of this, right? It's to have developed or continue to develop a self-awareness, to understand when our behaviors or when some of our beliefs serve us and when they don't. And unless we're kind of understanding of that, unless we pay attention to that and want to explore that further, then it becomes a little bit kind of finger in the wind exercise, right? Sometimes it might be okay and sometimes it might not. The more we understand about ourselves, the more we understand why we may respond in a certain way, then the more chance we've got to influence it, right? And it's not to say that we get that right every time, but it certainly gives us an advantage to at least try something different, to be able to impact change if we feel that change is there, as opposed to just being fixed, like say, with the same beliefs that may have served us previously, but no longer serve us going forwards. If we don't remove those metaphorical invisible barriers, then again we're only going to be able to achieve a limit at any given time, right?
I'm salivating at where this is going to go, but I want to just go back a step to what we were saying before we started recording about the perception of what a psychologist is and people's lack of understanding of what they might necessarily need. If they've got the physical capability, they might even have the environmental capability of, the support system around them, but there's something missing in the top 2 inches. So just to give the listeners an understanding of kind of what your role is, maybe even give us a bit of a brief timeline of how you've got there as well. What essentially is a sports psychologist? What does your work involve in present day, and how have you got to that stage?
Yeah. Again, to go back, just to provide a bit of context as to where I'm at now. So again, I was a strength and conditioning coach for 12 years in elite sport, and 12 very successful, happy years. But during that time, from a coaching perspective, I looked across the players or the athletes that I was working with, and physiologically, at that level, there wasn't a great deal of difference. Right? Everybody had their uniqueness, but there wasn't a great deal of difference. And then looking outside in, I was working in quite a technical sport, and so looking at that skill, again, it was a relatively level playing field. There wasn't a great deal of difference. Yet, performance individually was quite inconsistent, right? Some people would perform for periods of time, and some would go through kind of peaks and flows or whatever. And so I'm looking at this through a kind of physiological lens primarily at that time, and thinking, well, then what does make the difference? Because these things seem to be all relatively stable, which then kind of took me down that rabbit hole, that curiosity is like, is it a mindset thing? Like, is the uniqueness and the individuality from a mindset perspective then the differentiator? Does that make good, great, and great elite? And so, as I said, I further explored that. I studied mainstream psychology almost just to enhance my coaching practice at that point. I then went on and did a master's in sports psychology to really understand, again, my niche that I was working in. And again, I've felt that was the untapped piece, the untapped potential. I thought there was so much to explore there. A discipline that is obviously very complex. Yeah, we're talking about the human brain, which we still don't understand, right? So it's a very complex thing. But by default or by design, there were individuals that I was working with that seemed to be able to unlock it in a way that allowed that performance to be more consistent than others. So I then entered that world. I practice as a chartered psychologist now. And to define what that role is, or what it does, essentially, I want to try and allow people to think differently. Yeah, again, comes back to that limiting belief bit a little bit. If I'm operating the same way in every situation that I find myself in, sometimes it's going to pay off and sometimes it's not. And so am I able to understand myself enough, my uniqueness, my unique ability, to be able to apply that as a strength, to be able to really make that effective, but then to be able to have a number of skills and strategies that I can employ if I feel that it's not quite playing out as I want it to. And so my belief as a sports psychology is almost as a facilitator of conversation. I'm never there to say, this is what you need to do. I've no right to do that whatsoever. But again, through experience, then I think I can have a conversation with people. Again, the fundamental bit for me is the relationship and the rapport. to be able to understand the person that I'm speaking with, to be able to listen to them, to understand, not just to respond, and to be able to provide some kind of clarity, or potentially collaboratively come up with an alternative to say, right, this now gives you a choice to do something different, as opposed to continuing to do this, the thing the way you've always done that.
Let's go back to because you mentioned there about some people have it, they've naturally got the tendencies to be a little bit more aware, and you were seeing some common, I guess, examples of people who just had it versus the people that didn't. What is it that gives the people that had it that opportunity to have it? Is it how do people generate that self-awareness? And I ask this because there's people in kind of my immediate circle within this company that you can see they have that kind of high performance naturally. And I think a lot of them have usually come from sport. So I don't know whether it's that sporting environment that kind of breeds it and fosters that understanding of yourself and the role in which you've got within your team and the potential strengths and weaknesses that you might have and the things that you could work on, versus those that haven't got that backstory and grounding through sport or something else similar that kind of gives you it. So that they're constantly operating from a place of like a fixed mindset. And how do you try and get them to overcome that, short of giving them access or exposure to people such as yourself?
Again, I think some of it might be down to disposition. Yeah. So to our natural kind of personality preference, it might lend itself to that curiosity a little bit more, to that exploration, as to wanting to know myself a little more. I think, again, some people have been exposed to how that can benefit them, whether or not they've had some guidance through organisations, like you say, if they've got a sporting background, and they might have had exposure to some kind of psychological input or some understanding as to how psychology can be a proactive resource for them. And I just think some people choose not to want to do that, right? There are reasons where we don't want to explore it. Again, essentially for me, Ollie, it comes down to two things. It comes down to a choice, right? So if I can provide you with a choice to explore that or to not explore that, then that's your prerogative, right? But then the next bit is then, what do I want to do with that choice? If I choose to want to become more self-aware and uncover some things, then what does that mean? What action then do I need to take with the choice? And so I think the kind of breakdown in some of this is, again, some people don't want to make the choice. Some people choose not to explore it for whatever reason. Yeah. And if we do choose to, then again, do we actually know what we're going to do with that information once we unwrap or uncover some of that thing? And I think, again, people may try stuff short term, not necessarily see that immediate outcome, and then just default back to type. So again, I think it's this desire to, and again, that's something that I've seen. That's something that I kind of talk about within my framework a little bit, is this constant kind of iteration of it. Is it not this relentless pursuit to find out everything about me, but just this constant curiosity to say, right, do I know what makes me unique? And am I able to then apply and manage skills and strategies to allow me to continue to kind of look through the world, view the world through this lens of enrichment, to continue to grow, to then flourish, to thrive, to be as best as I can. Yeah. And that's not the end point. The real successful people, the high performers, then almost like it's almost like this infinity loop. They get to that point, and then it's like, okay, now where do I continue that self-development, that self-awareness, to then be able to expand on some of the skills and strategies that I've got, or introduce new ones, to then further grow, to then thrive at another level. You can see it's an endless pursuit. If you want it to be an endless pursuit.
I was going to say, is it an endless pursuit?
I think, again, my belief is it's infinite. My belief is to use that metaphor, you never complete the game.
Because the sort of the limitations for us physically as we age and everything else are obviously well documented. Are we suggesting that, and I think this is why it's quite exciting within business, but the mindset can continue to evolve and develop to a place where you're never going to complete it?
Again, my belief is absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of people will get to a level that serves them, and that's okay, right? And so what I'm not suggesting here is this relentless pursuit of it. I think, again, the shortfallings or the shortcomings from that perspective are that people want that quick win. They don't earn the right to then progress to that next level or to unlock the next level. They want to go as far as they can go. But I think there's scope. There's always something that we can develop. And again, you might hit ceilings. You might go as far as you can in a certain area, but there's a lot of areas that we can pursue. So again, I think the high performers, and again, I don't think this is always like intentional. I think they've just kind of stumbled across it to a degree, but they'll continue to work through that loop, and whichever direction that takes them off in, then again, they'll employ it.
It's interesting you say about stumbling across it. I mean, I will go on record to say I believe I'm a high performer, but a lot of when I've looked through your work, a lot of it I'm like, oh yeah, that's me, or I've done a little bit of that, or I can really relate to that, and very much sort of stumbled across all of those things. And I see it in like say peers of mine or people within the team that I think have the same traits. You can see that they've kind of got there by sometimes through potential coaching or previous experiences, but through trying and doing and remaining optimistic. I want to put a definition on peak performance as you see it, and also what it would feel like to someone, because I think a lot of the listeners that listen to this podcast are high achievers, people that want to go out and get after it, be it in their fitness, in their relationships, in their business, whatever it may be. And some of them might be at that place. Some of them might be a little bit naive or ignorant to think they're there, and perhaps not. Some people might feel stuck in where they're at and want to go to that next level. There's a lot of influential people that we can follow on social media that portray a certain lifestyle, live a certain way, that we can adopt those behaviors. And I think a lot of people are probably trying to mirror those behaviors, which I do think is a logical way to start to level up your thinking and even just like daily practices and behaviors. But I do think there's also a level of looking inside and actually the things that are unique to you and your experiences and what you can leverage that I think people miss because they don't really sit or have conversations with people to dig into themselves for fear of what they might find out, but also because in practice it actually takes time. And you need to know what you're doing. So I think a definition on what peak performance is, I know it might be hard to define because it's probably subjective to each individual, and also what it would feel like if you're there.
Again, it is difficult to define because I think it is very individual. It kind of goes back to my previous point in terms of I think everybody has an infinite potential. Yeah. So it's really understanding the direction that you're going in. And I think you made a really valid point in terms of this isn't about comparison. This is about like looking internally and saying, what is it that I want? Again, I might look externally and aspire to others or other endeavors or achievements that people have made. But it has to be guided for you. And again, this word kind of authenticity has become a little bit overused, but you have to show up as you. You have to do what you want to do and what you can do, as opposed to what others are doing. So again, it comes back down to the really knowing what your preferences align to. Yeah, what your personality, how that comes out as a strength, right? And how I can employ the constructs of that, the various different parts that make me. How do I mold those to allow me to perform from like a strength-based approach? How do I optimize that as best as possible? And then I think another fundamental part is then aligning that to behaviors that I want to live by. Yeah. So really being quite values driven in terms of like what is important to me. And I think if you can get a combination of that to really understand who I am, yeah, to then be able to use that as a strength to give me a USP on other people, and then to remain aligned to what is important, how I want to live my life. Yeah. And I think that's a real good start point, just to make sure that you stay in your lane.
Yeah, I made some notes on, I think you unpacked it on a post. There was sort of like eight points to what peak performance might look like. One of them was chasing purposeful pursuits. There's a lot of people out there working a 9 to 5 or doing stuff because they've kind of fallen into the trap, or, it's kind of, they followed a pathway that seemed like the logical one to do, but somewhere along the line they misalign with the values. And it's something, values is something that you always see on the gym wall within, sports teams. It's something you see within any gym that you go into. It's something that all the best companies will talk about their values and the vision and create great culture off the back of it. But I think individuals probably don't operate from a place of where do my values lie. You see a lot in the fitness industry. I think there's a lot of coaches will build their personal brand around the values and things that they hold true to them as a way of attracting their tribe and people into their ecosystem. But I think the everyday person probably doesn't operate from a place of values on a day-to-day basis.
I think, again, to really live to those values is the core part of this, right? Like you say, values or culture or things like that. It's easy to emblazon those use them as wallpaper on walls, or have them as a screensaver on your phone. But the point is there evidence to suggest that I'm actually living to those values? And oftentimes short-term win will compromise those values. Again, am I really being true to this thing? If I don't know, if I've got a value of integrity as an example, am I truly living to that value of integrity? Or is the lure for this kind of short, like you say, the shiny thing that might present itself to me at some point, am I really viewing that through that lens, or do I compromise the value? So it's all very well coming up with a set of values. And again, I think it's like, it has been kind of overused a little bit. I think it's really important to understand why those values mean something to you, and to start to also gather evidence from others to say, again, do you see me operating at this point? Am I truly living these things? And if I can establish what those values are, like I say, it's almost like this guiding principle that does keep me on track. So it's a relatively simple exercise to do, right? We can all get a list and start to tick off the things that resonate with us, or how we want to live our life, and probably distill that down to 2 or 3. The challenge is, am I true to those? Where's my sense check in terms of am I actually living to those values?
Yeah, we each quarter within the company we have what we call the value champions. So our values here are live, learn, and lead, and we've done various exercises in kind of what unpacking what live, learning, and leading would look like for us, both individually and also as a collective. And then each quarter we have value champions, which is essentially our way of picking individuals, and these are selected by the team. So you would be a value champion for 3 months, and then you would hand over that literally physical baton to the next person and say, right, you're going to take on now the live value. And what we encourage each person to do is to, through a series of kind of actions and behaviors, and even just being a little bit more top of mind, start to think about what that value is doing and what are they doing in those 3 months to try and embody it a little bit more and take it that one step further and uncover other things that they can then feed back to the team. And what we found is some really profound end of quarter kind of wrap up reviews from people where they have 2 to 3 minutes to sort of discuss what that value meant. And it's really enabled the values to, like I say, just be unpacked and taken a step further every time, which means that they become so much more visceral to each of us. And just hearing people talk back about what this value meant that, 12 months, 24 months ago, we came up with collectively, but now where it sits, and that deeper connection to it has actually been super powerful for us.
I think that's a really good example of taking something that's relatively generic that you want to live by from a brand or from a collective, and then allowing that individual interpretation as to that. So I think when personal values are also then aligned to, example, company or brand values, that's absolute gold. I think there's often difficulty where, again, I find myself in an environment where the values that are determined by my environment don't necessarily align to what my personal values are.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm compromising there. So again, I think just the individuality, the understanding from you to say, this is how we want to operate, but then what does that mean to you? To interpret that in a way that you do. And like I say, enhancing those individuals' awareness to really be able to articulate what that means for them, but then to also recognize and, like you say, show evidence to say that and you are living by them. I think is really powerful.
I mean, we're very welcoming and accommodating to different permutations of said values, but I think one thing that we've learned to do is when we're having one-to-ones or looking at performance, and we always refer back to those values because I think they're just so, for us, very all-encompassing as to what we're trying to achieve. How much merit is there in focusing solely on what you're good at versus looking at areas where you can improve?
Really good point. Again, from my perspective, I work through more of a strengths-based model. So I believe that, again, energy is finite, right? So why don't we expend our energy on the things that we're good at and try and make those even better? The chances are they will get better, and the chances are that I'm going to engage in wanting them to get better as well, right? As opposed to this kind of deficit approach, like you say, to say, right, where might my gaps be or limitations be? So if we're starting from a strengths-based approach, understanding again where those strengths play out at their best, what that sweet spot looks like. And so as opposed to then looking at what gaps do I need to fill, I would suggest more, how do I optimize those strengths? From a strengths perspective, then I need to just be aware that if I overdo that strength or apply that strength in the wrong context or situation, then again, that strength then becomes a limitation, right? That strength could become a weakness. And so my approach is to understand what those strengths play out like in their sweet spot. Where are my red flags to say, okay, I'm overdoing this? Yeah, this now isn't a strength anymore. This is becoming a limitation. Yeah, you're smiling.
I smile because, it's like my strength is just like a doggedness and not to give up. But there's times in the past where it just burnt me out because I'm too stubborn and too tunnel vision to know when I'm just doing too much of it.
Absolutely. So you take that as a strength, like you say, that commitment or that endeavor to really want to see everything through that I do, right? They're super strength in the right situation and in the right context. But if I take that too far, yeah, or if I approach everything that I do through that lens, then like you say, at times that's going to be to the detriment of me. And so again, am I aware? Can I detect that first of all? Like best case scenario, I don't allow myself to swing that scale, right? I keep it balanced. I don't overdo it. So can I detect it? And if I can't detect it, then again, when I'm aware of it, can I then manage it and bring it back? And so a part of that is, again, for you to be aware, but for also other people around you to be aware, right? What do others need to know to allow me to ensure that I can stay in that sweet spot? And what does my environment need to provide me with to allow me to express that strength as best as it can be, and not to underdo it or not to overdo it? And I think, again, it's just this goes back again. If I'm understanding of that, then I can influence it, right? If I know what that strength looks like overdone, then I don't need to get to burnout. I can sense that. I can kind of feel that coming on, and I can then employ some kind of skill or strategy to bring it back, or just get picked up by somebody else who observes it within you and just say, Ollie, you go in there, you're going too far. Let's just bring it back in.
Yeah, where my mind goes to is that, your experiences as an S&C coach within professional cricket, I think you worked then in rugby, my experiences within rugby, and then coming into a company where I wanted to build teams straight from the get-go. You can often, when you're talking about that sort of balance of a team or constructing a high-performing team, you're thinking about people's strengths and also areas where other people can plug the gaps. So we're very fortunate that my weaknesses, quote unquote, are complemented by other people's strengths. And I guess some people listening will think, well, I don't potentially operate as part of a team, or, I don't have access to other people left and right of me that can cover my back on certain things. But actually, then it's about looking outside the box a little bit with your relationships with your partner potentially, or your friendship group, or your parents, or your brothers or sisters. Because the next point that is very evident from, I see the work you're doing, but also my experiences is, environment really does dictate performance, and the people that are around you and your tribe, so to speak. So is what I've said there, is that fair to suggest that if people don't have that immediate team, I'm play for whatever, a rugby team, a lacrosse team, or I work for a company where there's a very sort of teamwork, someone might work from home or self-employed, whatever it may be. How do they kind of create a tribe that they're able to bounce off and have their weaknesses protected?
Yeah, great. A couple of points there. So to come back to the individual, first of all, I think a myth that is still understood and we really need to debust is that, albeit that I might lead with a certain preference, my behavior presents in a certain way, or my personality is this, it's not fixed. We're not only that. Okay, that's how I show up the majority of the time, and probably that serves me well the majority of the time. But we can all be anything that we want to be. I think that's a really important point to understand. And so, if, like you say, if from your perspective, from a natural personality, it appears like, again, I'm very much on task, and I'm quite action oriented, I'm quite direct. Yeah, that's a personality characteristic, and that's okay, right? But what's also okay is for me to be a bit more reflective, or a bit more observing, or a bit less towards the thing, and maybe more aware as to what the effect that has on other people, right? So again, we've all got this ability to adapt, and if we don't adapt, again, it's that adage of, if I do the same thing the same way, then I'm going to get the same result, right? So again, from my experience, like high performance environments have got a real mix of those characters and different preferences and dispositions within them. And again, oftentimes not intentionally, like we don't recruit for that, right? But it just happens that the people that we've got there then cover all of those bases. The advice I would say to you is, where other people could fill that gap, can I challenge myself first and foremost to do that, right? It's an easy kind of off to say, right, that's your strength, so I'd designate that to you and you do that. But again, that kind of then reinforces your fixedness a little bit to say, okay, again, I'm only going to operate in this way. So from an individual perspective, first of all, I would encourage everybody to first of all believe that they can maneuver themselves around any kind of personality difference. Yeah. If my inclination is more towards following logic and system, and I like structure, again, what would happen if I just threw everything up and see what landed, right? Again, it wouldn't feel comfortable and it wouldn't feel natural, but I can do that if I want to. Yeah. As opposed to just being fixed in what I believe my personality to be. And we're very good at doing that, right? But then we apply labels to that. So, do you know what I mean? So somebody who operates like that, okay, well, yeah, they're the analyst, or they're the spreadsheet guy, right? And all of a sudden they're wearing that sticker. And so, like you say, it's then easy to say whenever we need a solution to that problem, then okay, well, let's go and speak to that person. So again, just having an understanding first of all, just to say I can take that on.
How, I think everything you're speaking today, I was go straight to my sister, because she's literally that person you're talking about. How much influence do you think it is on the fact that people have become accustomed to wanting things to be a little bit too easy with high performance? How hard does it need to feel? How hard should it feel?
Yeah, it should feel hard. Again, I think, again, almost speaking back to that previous point, that there needs to be an element of, there needs to be challenge. Right? So again, a lot of the research in resilience or mental fortitude, if I can kind of, if you can imagine on a vertical axis challenge, low to high, and on a horizontal axis support, low to high, right? Again, the research suggests that to really have this facilitative environment to allow people to flourish and to thrive and to perform at high levels, there needs to be a high level of challenge, right? People need to be challenged, but that needs to be balanced with a high and an appropriate level of support. Okay, so if we were to think about that top right kind of within that framework, high challenge, high support is kind of where we want to get to provide the conditions for people to flourish and to thrive. If I have a high challenge environment, but yet don't provide an appropriate level of support, or that support isn't aligned to the challenge that people face, then it can easily become this unrelenting environment, right? And again, we can all kind of cite examples of either being a part of that, or from outside in seeing examples of how that's been, and which again eventually leads to burnout or effects on your well-being. It's not a sustainable place to be. And similarly, if we dose the challenge down and continue to provide high levels of support, it can become quite a comfortable environment, right?
Micromanaging and
right. So again, I'm not necessarily being pushed. I'm not expanding on my qualities. Yet I feel relatively safe, and so it could lead to kind of this complacency, or just this kind of just doing this thing. The place we certainly don't want to be is low challenge and low support, which is cited as what they call a stagnant environment, right? Just an existence. So I think it's really important to understand that as a framework, to say, I know that I need challenge, yeah, and again, some of that challenge I put on myself, some of that challenge might be put upon me, but I also understand the significance of support. Going back to that tribe thing that you said, like, I need to then be able to formulate a network of people around me that can provide the right support to the challenges that I face. Again, I think a misunderstanding around support is support, right? And oftentimes support is considered as emotional support. Yeah. But if the challenge requires a piece of information as opposed to the metaphorical arm around the shoulder, then all of a sudden that challenge might look slightly different. And so, again, understanding that first of all, support is integral to me. This isn't a lone race. This isn't all about me as an individual. It's going back to what makes high performance. I think people that operate at that level have formed an ecosystem, have formed a support network around them that serves that purpose, right? First of all, knowing that I know that I need to access support at times. And when I do access it, then the support is aligned to the challenge that I face.
I'm someone who needs or craves positivity and optimism around me, to operate at the level that I want to try and operate at. And I think that optimism and that realism, I think, is very key at the same time. I love that you said optimism is not a choice, and it can be practiced. What are the key things? And I'm sort of framing this for people that I know will listen to this podcast that are quite close to me. What are the key things for someone to try and break free of that, the constant feeling of looking at the glass half empty?
Again, just some understanding first of all. Like, we all have a negativity bias, right? That comes back through evolution in terms of from a protective mechanism. Then the tendency was we would consider the negative thing before we considered the positive thing, right? So that's I think that's an important acknowledgement first of all. Secondly, when we look at this, then again, everybody is going to be different, and so as opposed to looking at a continuum of optimism to pessimism, let's just look at a continuum of optimism, right? So less optimistic to more optimistic. And again, there's theory to suggest that just through our life experiences, we will all be somewhere on that continuum. Yeah, we'll tend to operate within a zone of that continuum. And so I'm either going to be more looking forward in terms of what there is to gain, what the reward is, right? That's a high level of optimism. Or I might be more sensitive to like what there potentially is to lose. Okay. Now again, there's no right place on that continuum. And the understanding is dynamic. So as much as I might operate in a certain way, is that serving me for the purpose that I find myself in? And so I think an inherent characteristic of high performers is that they have this positive outlook. Yeah. But what you said was important. It's not just this blind optimism. It's not just kind of shooting for the stars at everything that they do. There's a healthy dose of realism to it as well. And so you can see on that continuum where that is. I'm not just trying to be overly optimistic in everything that I do. I think I need to then temper that and balance it out with an appropriate level of mitigation if something doesn't go right. Yeah. So again, I would encourage people to look forward, to seek the opportunity, but to be able to apply an appropriate level of realism that doesn't temper or dampen that desire to go forward. Yeah. But also prevents them from, say, blindly going into things and probably not achieving what they're looking to achieve in the first place.
I consider myself very fortunate that I've sort of stacked evidence from a young age in sport and now in business through kind of constant trying and iteration. And so I believe I've practiced that ability to be really positive and to have a good understanding of what is realistic, but also what is a stretch and what is a big challenge. And I attribute a lot of the success I've had personally and also then professionally to the fact that I'm always towing the line with the maximum I can try and get out from any stage of my life or the capacity that I have or the resource that's available to me. But how do others practice that? Is it, I think I'm kind of answering the questions I think through it, but is it those small steps of constantly looking forward and stacking a bit of evidence that they can become the person they want to try and be? Because I think it's very prevalent in the fitness industry, particularly with some of these challenges you see people doing now and the rise of running further and really try and challenge themselves physically, that you're seeing people begin to really grow as characters. And I think what they would then pursue both physically is then be able to be brought into their business or the way in which they attack life more holistically. How does someone that isn't that way inclined begin to practice?
So to zoom out of that, I think, again, what is important, first of all, is to understand where you're going. So to have a direction of travel. Yeah. Whatever it is that you're looking to do, then what does that axis look like? And it's not that at the end point necessarily, but it's just like if I'm continue to move in this direction, then again, is that going to allow me to at least have a chance of achieving the thing that it is that I'm trying to achieve? I think if we're to take that step back, then again, what is the short term bit? What is the destination that I'm trying to achieve? So again, it might be like I want to compete at the best level I can at High Rocks, as an example, right? And yet to bring that back, then first and foremost, I need to perform well in this competition, this specific competition, right? That's the destination. Then to take a step back again, reverse engineer that. Then again, what steps do I need to do from now until that point to allow that to be as positive as it can be, right? So what are some of the kind of milestones or landmarks that I need to hit? Yeah. And then if I bring it back a step again, then this then comes back to the kind of systems that I then apply. What do I need to do? What do I need to do on a regular basis to allow me to hit that milestone? And if I hit that milestone, then that's going to give me the best chance to be able to reach that destination. And if I reach that destination, then I know that that's taking me on the direction that I want to take on. And again, it just becomes this kind of compounding thing, and it's this iterative process to say, again, I think in kind of goal setting, like classic psychological skills goal setting, then we talk about outcome and process. And again, it's become a little bit overused, right? But essentially it's that, it's understanding that I need to know what it is that I'm going after. Yeah. And to some degree, that might just be kind of, it's there somewhere. And if I go in that direction, it's there. And other times it's a real fixed point, a real specific point to say that is the thing. But there's so many variables around that are out of my control, or out of my influence. And so then if I can bring it back to say, right, if I do these things regularly to be able to, again, allow the best chance to be able to get that bit, then it comes back to the things that I can do.
My mind keeps jumping back to real life examples that I've got, like I say, quite close to me. And the thing you said there about goal setting and also sport, the people that I know that are the highest achievers, they're constantly looking for what that next goal is, whether it's a race, a competition, the next step in their career. And the people that I know that don't think that way, they don't seem to be the high performers. Is that fair to say that like that constant need to strive for something? And again, it's subjective for how hard that striving should be. Is it very essential for becoming more high performing?
I think it is. I think that vision is central to that kind of high performance mindset. And I think the bit that I would add is it's not necessarily then about the kind of attainment of the goal. It's what I've learned to allow me to get to that point. So again, I think it goes back to that previous piece. If we become too focused on the outcome, then again, it becomes a bit of a kind of tick or cross exercise, right? If I achieve it, then okay, happy days, and probably some short-term gratification, but that's usually all it is, right? We've kind of, now what? Whereas if I employ some kind of real purposeful habits along the way that has allowed me to get to that point, right? And again, sometimes I've employed some real purposeful habits and I don't achieve that thing. It's more about my learnings from what I've done to be able to at least give me a chance to, as opposed to the execution of that thing. So again, I think from a high performance mindset, it kind of again comes back to this infinity loop. Is that it's never a point. I never reached that point and gone and mastered it, cracked it. It's like, okay, I either achieved that thing that I was going after, or I didn't. But that's still not going to detract me from employing these consistent behaviors and patterns of behavior that allow me to potentially fulfill that going forwards again.
That links nicely into this understanding of or the concept of failure, because you're either going to get a cross or a tick. And if we're thinking about this kind of infinite pursuit of high performance, some of the best performers have quote unquote failed. What should our relationship be with failure? And because a lot of people are scared to start because of fear of failure, how should we view it as a positive?
Again, I think the reality is that we are, right? Like we're not. There's nobody on the planet that wins at everything at every time. There's I saw recently there's a piece going around on socials, Roger Federer, and again it was something like he cited the number of games that he'd won, or the number of games that he played, and then I think he said he'd won 80% of those games, right? But out of the 80% of the games that he'd won, he'd only won 52% of the points. So he's almost lost a point to every point that he's won. And his point was really relevant in terms of like, I can't dwell on the failure. You know, I mean, the point that I've lost is a failure, right? But I can't dwell on the failure. And you look at him as like super successful. I can't dwell on losing that previous point. What I need to do is align my mind to what I can determine right now. And I think it's the same with failure. It's just like, if things don't match what my perceived outcome was, or what my intended outcome was going to be, then what can I learn from that? Again, it goes back to, I think, an inherent trait within high performers is that they do then reflect. They do look at that and debrief and understand what they may do differently if they're faced with the same or similar situation going forward. So I think failure is inevitable, right? And first of all, it's the acceptance of and the acknowledgement that sometimes it's not going to go to plan. But what have I learned from that process that I can apply going forward to ensure that my failures become less and less, right? With probably an understanding that, again, I'm not going to be able to eradicate that altogether.
You touched about 5-10 minutes ago, or you mentioned High Rocks. I think it's really topical right now. I think the rise of fitness racing has been great for a number of reasons. Participation for people, giving people a North Star in their training diary. But But I think the biggest one for me, and we talk about it a lot at Marchon, is this concept of like athlete 2.0. And you're seeing people kind of in their 30s, 40s. We had, I think 5 or 6 teams compete at turf games at the weekend, 2 of which a little bit closer to home from the Harpenden gym here, and we had a team of ladies and a mixed team. I don't think they'll mind me saying, but they're all kind of, in their mid 40s, your everyday people, and they're getting outside their comfort zone. They're going competing, and I'm sure there's a huge amount of nerves and anxiousness and whatever else going into days like that, where they feel potentially out of their depth, out of place. But with the rise of Hyrox and all these other things, what can we learn or take from elite sport in terms of the kind of the mental aspect of it, to apply it to things that now people have access to, like a Hyrox, that then can compound in everything else that they're doing? Because I likened, and I've referenced it probably 3 or 4 times on this podcast, a lot of my way of thinking was the indoctrination into an elite sporting environment where I was around 16 to 20 years old, around some of the best rugby players on the planet, internationals, British and Irish Lions. And so you get the rub of these people, and you start to think differently, you're acting differently, and you've also got a schedule of your day that you're almost doing it without really knowing. Whereas a lot of people don't have access to that. But the routine and discipline of training now 3 to 5 times a week, and the ability to set a goal of Hyrox and being slightly uncomfortable and training towards something, putting yourself in that environment and competing, irrespective of score or ranking or where you finish, is huge for starting to drive a little bit more high performance in their life, in the way in which they just act out. I don't think people are particularly mindful of that fact, though. What can they be drawing on from elite sport and the things that you've encountered with those athletes? And what can they be thinking about as they're going into these races, and ways in which they can really, I guess, double down on the opportunity they have with these races now?
Again, I think even just in that introduction, I think you've referenced a lot of kind of techniques and skills and strategies that are really useful in that part, right? It's going into a Hyrox as an example with some kind of understanding in terms of what it is that I'm trying to influence, what it is I'm trying to go after. But it's not based on a pass or fail. It's not like, again, it's being understanding enough to say, this is what it is that I'm trying to achieve. But that's not the success criteria. If I do that or don't do that, then again, what have I learned in that process? So what have I taken from it? I think Hyrox, just by definition, is like relatively or allows individuals to break it down, right? So again, I think if you're looking at Hyrox as an event, then it could potentially be quite overwhelming, right? I'm gonna be like working really hard for a decent period of time across kind of multimodal activities. Whereas if I break that down into the individual components of what that looks like, again, that allows us to stay a little more present in mind, and not to become kind of like we've alluded to before, not to direct my attention in terms of like what has been, in terms of like, well, that particular discipline or part of Hyrox didn't go as well as I would have liked it, and carrying that thought with me, or projecting too far ahead and being just like, okay, am I working towards the time that I'm trying to get to, or whatever. So again, I think by breaking the event down into manageable chunks, I think is a really useful strategy. So I'm as present in mind at any given moment as I can be. I think going back to understanding what your individual strengths are as a competitor or as an athlete, I think again are really useful. Against what we referenced before, like again, if I can apply those strengths and work those strengths as best as I can, then again that's going to be really useful. And then, as I say, I think it's not becoming too fixated on the thing. Yeah, like even the point that you stood on that start line and you're competing at that suggests that you've done some pretty cool stuff to get to that point in the first place, right? So the event in itself isn't the success, isn't what I'm going after. It's understanding what I've done to allow me to get to that point, to then compete, to then have a reference point to say, right, if I want to continue to explore this, then how do I optimize and how do I enhance some of the things that I've done? I think another really important piece here is that post-event, then you reflect on that event in an appropriate way. And again, this is another characteristic that I think, again, whether by choice or not, that a lot of high performers adopt, and that is purposeful reflection. What I mean by that is that they're not debriefing everything that they do through an emotional lens. They start with what happened. They start with the fact, and then they bring the emotion to it. Because oftentimes our subsequent action will be determined by the conclusion that we've come to at that point, right? So if I compete in this high rocks and it's not the time that I wanted to get, then I'm probably, if I reflect inappropriately or ineffectively, I'm going to reflect through the emotion that has caused me, right? And the outcome that I come to is probably not going to be that strategic going forwards to improve that. Whereas if I can take the emotion away to start with and just say, right, what happened? Yeah. And then based on what happened, how did that make me feel? And what was good or bad? And what might I learn differently? And what can I adopt next time? Then that's going to be a far more effective way to approach that as not.
Yeah, I think the example of high rocks, and we can liken it to anything, whether it's your 10K, your half marathon, anything, a physical endeavor. I think I really like that. And you use the term reference point. I think if people are listening and struggling to think about strategies to start to be a little more high performing, I think that the power is in something physical, because the routine and discipline around training, all the other benefits that are obviously going to come with it, I think it's a really nice starting point for a lot of people that then they can use in whatever else they're trying to achieve, whether it's in their relationships or their career and development there. That's really powerful. The post you did around the mindful runner, I think running's obviously really topical as well. I know there's a lot of people both recreationally and also moving more to the more competitive lens and looking to achieve certain times and things. What are the things that they should be? What did you want to achieve with those posts?
Again, I think like the kind of running clubs and participation in running seems to, like you say, seems to be going through the roof, right? It seems to be going up and up. And again, there's a whole breadth of people that are then taking this up. So similarly, I think if you're going to commit to something, then there's obviously a desire to want to do that to the best of your potential, right? And so I think the purpose of that post was just to look at running as a modality and just to say, okay, well, some of these suggestions might be really useful. Again, a lot of the content that I share is for that reason. I don't think this should just be available to those people that are working or that are part of an organisation, as a sporting organisation or otherwise, that have got access to this resource, right? And like you say, like the majority of people out there don't necessarily have access to it. And so the purpose of this is to say, if you were to look at this through a slightly different lens or adopt some of these principles, then again, is that going to allow you to perform at a slightly different level? So again, from a running perspective, I think through that series, we looked at some of the things we've spoken about already. We looked at like how might I approach a race based on my natural preference, based on my disposition. Am I going after a time? Yeah. Or is it just the experience of being amongst others? Is that the reason that I'm doing this thing, right? Am I somebody who needs to look at my Garmin every K and understand exactly what splits I'm hitting, and if I hit these splits, I'm going to be on track to getting that final time, right? Or am I just more kind of enjoying the experience and just going with the flow and not necessarily seeing how fast I can run or what time I can get, but just to be a bit more kind of open and see, I wonder what time I might achieve, right? So again, I think it's first of all just adopting your preference to that, to understand how your personality can benefit, but again, not going back to what we said previously, not becoming fixed in that, right? If suddenly I'm a little bit over my split, then that's not going to derail me. That's not going to affect me. Yeah, I'm not going to be so fixated by the data that that's going to then impair or impact my performance, right? I'm going to use it conducively. But so what might be some kind of counters to that if I feel that I'm overdoing that a little bit more? I think we spoke a little bit in that particular post again about this sense of flow, or this state of flow. And again, flow is a real interesting concept. Again, we talk about it a lot, this flow state. And again, I think people think that it's this kind of elusive state that some of us may have experienced, or some of us may not have. And again, in the literature, flow state is kind of characterized as this, kind of timeless, effortless kind of space that we find ourselves in. And I think the reality is that flow is always there, but we get in the way of it. So again, if I can start to understand how I can create the conditions to try and get into flow more regularly, then again, it gives me more chance to do that. And so some of those things were around, again, breaking it down. Again, if we zoom out a little bit, not look too big picture, but be able to break that down into manageable chunks. And again, that is conducive to trying to get into this state of flow. Another characteristic there is understanding, or having an alignment between what the challenge is compared to what our skill level is, right? So if the challenge meets our skill, then again, we're more likely to be able to operate in that space. Whereas if there's misalignment there, i.e., if I over-egg the challenge, if I'm trying to run a time that actually I'm not capable of running, then I'm never going to get into flow state. Yeah. Or similarly, if I'm not taking this seriously enough, or the challenge is lower than the skill, then oftentimes we'll then compromise on the skill, right? We'll bring our skill level down to this lower level of challenge. And the third condition is an intense kind of attention or concentration. So again, and what I mean by this is just to be focused in on the thing that you're doing, right? That's not to say that you need to be devoid of any other thought, or again, not taking in the whole experience if that's part of why you're doing that thing. But I need to be concentrated on the thing that I'm doing. So if I can break this thing down. So again, you take a 10K or half marathon or whatever. If I can break this thing down into manageable chunks, if I can run at a level that is comparable to my skill level in terms of then trying to align that to what it is that I'm trying to get. So that speed of running allows me to complete in the time that I can achieve this. It's going to be challenging. And I can hold my attention. I can become fully immersed within the activity that I'm doing, whilst being understanding of what's going on around me. Then there's more chance that I'm going to be able to create a more optimal performance state than not. And again, if I can do that, if I'm aware of that, if I can operate in that space, then I can refine it. I can continue to do that. Whereas if I don't know what those things are, and again, some days I'm going to go out and I'm going to run and be like, oh, that was great, I'm going to continue to do this, right? And other days, my performance isn't going to be that. And again, kind of flip-flop between those things. And it's just like, oh, do I want to continue with this, or do I not want to continue with this? Or I ran really well, or I didn't really run really well. Again, it's just trying to bring some of these things in to stabilize, kind of almost operationalize it in a way that you can then affect it again if you so choose to.
It's like having a level of predictability, I guess. Intentionality.
Yeah, intention is key to it. Like again, if I can go into things with intention, if there's an understanding as to why I'm doing it, then like I say, I can affect it if I so choose to, right? But if I don't do that, then again, it's just going to be like hit and miss.
Because the example you were given before about people's their why for doing the race, for example, because I think a lot of people attribute high performance with winning or the time, and then they'll just convince themselves that they're not naturally high performing because they're never going to win, or they're always going to be slow and what have you. Whereas if if success looks like being present for the entire race and maintaining a positive, headspace for the entire race, then that is, you're high performing. So I think just that understanding of what high performance would look like for you based on what your outcome is, or what the outcome you're trying to achieve.
I think that success criteria is critical. And again, not being so kind of objective with it, right? Again, let's consider what some subjective success criteria might be. Again, how has this made me feel? What's this sense of accomplishment? What have I learned along the way to get me to this point? Yeah, all those things are metrics that I can take on and adopt, and probably repeat more, right? Like you say, if all I'm going after is the time, there's so many things that are potentially out of my influence or out of my control that can affect that outcome, right? And if success is purely based on that, then like I say, it's going to be just like Federer. There's going to be disappointment.
It's making so much more sense now, because I go back to I guess when I was first introduced to a high performing environment or high performers, and where I sit now, sort of 20 years into that kind of journey, and where the next 20 years and the next 20 years can potentially go. I think just keep bringing it back to the people that are listening, that maybe they're looking just to become a little bit more high performing, and the things in which they can do that aren't necessarily attached to the fact that, because the people they will follow, whether it's the high rocks races, for example, they're following the elite 15, the winners, the guys that are running stupid times. And it can almost be a little bit dismissive to actually where they're at and what they can achieve. So I think it's just about plotting what that next 12 month of progression looks like in terms of calendar of races or achievements, the day-to-day things that you can do to build consistency, the environment that you can, and the relationships in which with the people around you that can help foster a more positive outlook on it. I think that's been really powerful. You mentioned before we started speaking about the kind of 4 components of high performance. Have we touched on all of those in enough detail? Or?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I mean, just going back to the origins of kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So in ancient times, it was believed that that if you found kind of harmony between the 4 essential elements, which are earth, air, fire, and water, right? If you found harmony with those things, then you were able to perform miraculous feats. And so I kind of use that concept to create elementary performance, right? Hence the name a little bit, in terms of what might be the 4 essential elements within high performers, that if we understood that and we could harmonize those, then it allowed us to fulfill our ambition, right? And I think we've covered all of them to some degree. I think it starts with awareness. So the first element is something around learning about yourself, about understanding what your unique abilities are, and then being able to apply your unique strengths in a way that's probably guided by some fundamental principles, i.e. the values part of it, right? The second element, I think, is managing that understanding through adoption of specific and purposeful skills and strategies. Yeah. So I can put some of these things in, like we've talked about optimism as an example. We've talked about talked a little bit about thinking patterns, and again, how can I be as clear of thought as possible? So that kind of comes into that pillar, if you like, or that element.
So what are you calling that element? Is it what's?
So that would be managing yourself through the application of skills and strategies that I can employ, right? So I've learned about me. I'm now managing that learning through potential things that allow me to expedite allow me to express some of those specific dispositions and strengths. I think the third pillar I call nurture. So again, I think high performers view the world through this lens of enrichment. Yeah, they're constantly looking to grow, but part of that growth is the development of an ecosystem. So again, we've talked about the importance of support. Yeah, this isn't just like me on my own. This isn't a lone race. This is just trying to incorporate other people around me or learn from other people around me, right? So there's this constant kind of vision for growth. We talked about flow, again, the adoption of understanding what my kind of ideal or optimal performance state is. Yeah. And continually growing on that. And we touched on this adaptability piece. Again, if I'm purely fixed in who I am, then I'm gonna hit a ceiling, right? And so part of that growth is understanding where it's going to be useful for me to maneuver myself around. And then the final bit is thrive. So again, really flourishing. And again, for me, that's around the optimization. Yeah, that's about, again, so some real purposeful reflection in terms of a continual learning. Again, if I can optimize, my kind of reflection or my debrief or my practice, then again, that's gonna give me things to continue to go forward with. Something there around the direction that I'm traveling in. Again, just having some kind of point of reference where I'm going, and then just working back, as we spoke about, working back to then the destination, the milestones and the systems. And I think the only thing we haven't really covered, which probably then comes more into your lane a little bit more, is again that relationship between performance and well-being. Yeah. And I think, again, some real key pillars.
It's funny you say it, because I have here prioritizing well-being. Where does well-being sit within it? I just move past it.
So again, it's integral. I think well-being is the centerpiece of high performance, right? And again, if I was to define well-being, and I think, again, it's a lot of what you guys do really well and what you speak about is around that connection between the effect that movement or exercise has on an individual, and again, a healthy body is a healthy brain, right? The importance of nutrition, again, like literally food for thought, right? That's what we say. So again, am I really dialing that in? And then I say sleep, but just recovery in general. Again, like from a cognitive perspective, for me to be able to operate, then I need to recover, right? And I need my brain to be able to develop and adapt like anything else. And so again, I think that final piece around just ensuring that we're consistent again in our behaviors around movement, nutrition and sleep, I think are really important. And then the final thing to add is that's not then complete, right? I don't get to that point, or high performers don't get to that point and be like, right, cracked it, that's me done. Like we kind of referenced before, I present that as almost this infinity loop, that once we get to that point, then it takes us back to the start in terms of like, now what do I need to know more about me to take me to the next piece, right? And then how can I then enhance some of the skill strategies that I've got, or introduce others that I may not have considered before, to then continue to look through this growth lens to say, right, again, what further do I need to develop to then optimize this even more? And again, I think it's this endless loop.
Yeah, it's funny we come back to wellbeing, because I actually spoke to Ollie Patrick about his kind of pillars of wellbeing. I've always viewed fitness as being the first thing that people seem to engage in, because they're like, lack of confidence in the way they're looking, or they've had some sort of health scare, or whatever it may be, or they're struggling to fit in their dress, whatever it may be. Fitness is the easiest kind of low barrier that they first go to, whether it's running, going to a gym, going to a class. They then start to address the nutrition, because they realize it's a really key component of kind of how this all works. That then, I think those two begin to breed this mindset piece, because of the routines and the disciplines and the fact that you are fueling now your body with better nutrition, and that's influencing the way you're performing physically, but also the way you're performing both mentally as well. So yeah, I think it's such a big piece of it, and I think we've talked to now some practical application of what they can be doing that is deliberately and intentionally working on their mindset and becoming more high performing, alongside the default of it just happening because you're training and you're eating well. I think it's the intentionality and actual awareness of what's going on up top, or the change in your thoughts because you've gone to the gym and you're eating better, and how you can actually start to compound and double down on that so that you can continue that kind of infinite pathway.
I think again, it all feeds back into it, right? If we're aware of it, if we want to understand it, if we pay attention to these things, then again we can continue to develop them. Whereas if, like I say, we're not not tuned into it, or we're not really responsive as to what the effect that is having on me, then we probably just continue to do things as we've always done them, right? Kind of use that expression again. I encourage people to be a little bit more by design than by default, which goes back to your intention piece, I guess. If we can understand it, then we can start to put things into place to try and affect this, right? And then we can look at that and review that and say, is this useful or not? And if it is, then we're probably going to continue to do it. And if it's not, then fine, let's just find another way. But if we're just leaving everything to chance, and certainly from a performance perspective, and in high performance, as you know, it can't be left to chance, right? So again, if we go in with intention to say, right, I'm giving myself the best chance to go after whatever it is that I'm going after, then I think that's a much better place to be than to be like, what if I'd have done that, or could I have done that differently, or whatever. So it goes back to that point in terms of, regardless of what the outcome is, have I done everything within my capability and my understanding, right? And again, like you say, it's an evolution. We don't know all the answers. But at this point in time, have I done everything that I feel that I could do to contribute to what it was that I was trying to achieve? And if I can, then the outcome kind of is irrelevant to some extent. I think that's I find much more solace in that place than getting to that point and just being like, yeah, could I have done that differently, or maybe I could have done that a bit better.
This conversation has been fascinating for me. It's one of those ones that I can't wait just to share with the entire team that kind of work within Marchon, and also the listeners. Your Instagram page, not to make it all about your Instagram page, but I think it's just such a great visual representation of the things we're talking about. And I think that's the beauty of Instagram, is the access now to people such as yourself that have these fascinating brains or ways to look at things, and then us be able to take the information and understand it in a way that's easy, simplified. And we spoke before we started about this topic being quite confusing for people, and people not really knowing whether, how do they fit into it, or how do they take bits from it and action it. So certainly implore everyone to go and follow the Instagram page. I think it's fantastic. I love the way you're curating those posts and where you're going with it. Where can people, as well as the Instagram page, where can people find out more about this? Because a lot of my listeners are people who want to own gyms, want to excel in sport, want to build a big business, want more for themselves. And I think access to people like you and the way in which you think is super helpful for them. So where do they go to find more?
Cool. First of all, thanks for that. Again, I'm extremely fortunate to work with a very talented creative. I can't take credit for the visuals that we present, but like you say, I think is taken relatively complex and misunderstood principles, and at first hand just trying to represent it in a way that makes some sense, right? And then hopefully just applying or adding a little bit more rationale as to what that is. And so that, as I say, that seems to be working. I post across all socials, but probably am most active on Instagram. We're going to continue to do this. Again, like I say, my passion, if you like, or my mission is to try and share as much of this information with as many people as possible. So we're going to continue to iterate this and refine it and make it better, and to learn from people that are consuming this as to what they want, and to try and individualize it and tailor it as much as possible. I guess the next big project that we're working on is more of a kind of, what I would say, community of practice. So again, we're about to kind of soft launch some a kind of program that goes through a lot of what we've spoken about today, but don't want it just to be another online course. I think the bit that's missing in a lot of this from an education perspective is the accountability piece. Yeah, and so again, we want to try and create this community where it's collaborative and is immersive and is and there's a responsibility from everybody that's involved in that community to want to kind of enhance whatever potential is for them, right? And so that's really exciting. Again, I think it's going to be quite a lot like a live community and kind of constant adaptation of that. So that's the next big thing. But yeah, just check out the stuff. And if it's, like I say, if there's other areas that people are interested in, then let us know and we can explore that.
We'll see you in the community. Thanks very much for coming on, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate you, Ollie. Thanks.